The Ottoman Empire was not white. It was Turkic, Arab, Persian, and Balkan, and it thrived for 600 years without any need for a European identity. The Ottoman Empire's ruling class was ethnically diverse, with origins in Central Asia's Turkic tribes. The empire spanned 3 continents, incorporating Anatolians, Arabs, Persians, Kurds, Greeks, Albanians, Bosniaks, Armenians, Slavs, and Jews. The founding Osmanli dynasty was Turkic, not European. The empire was Islamic and multi-ethnic, with a governing system that included Arabs, Persians, and others at high levels. White supremacists ignore that Ottoman identity was based on religion and empire, not race. One of the biggest historical distortions is the claim that the Janissary Corps, Ottoman elite soldiers, proved that the Ottoman Empire was white. The reality? The Janissaries were recruited through the Devshirme system, taking boys from Christian Balkan populations, including Greeks, Albanians, Serbs, Bosnians, etc., and converting them to Islam. Being a Janissary was not about whiteness. It was about loyalty to the Sultan and to Islam. Many of the empire's greatest military and political leaders were of mixed backgrounds, including Arabs, Persians, and North Africans. White supremacists erased this diversity to pretend that the Ottomans were just an extension of European greatness. The reality was the exact opposite. The Ottoman Empire was feared because it was a non-white power. The Ottomans weren't seen as white by Europeans. They were seen as a foreign, non-Christian force that challenged European dominance for centuries. The sieges of Vienna in 1529 and 1683 were seen as existential threats to Christian Europe. The Ottomans allied with Muslim and non-European powers such as Persia and India's Mughal Empire. European powers repeatedly called Ottomans barbaric Turks and saw them as an Asiatic threat. If the Ottomans were white, why did Europe spend hundreds of years treating them as an outsider enemy? So why do white supremacists try to claim the Ottoman Empire as their own? It's simple. They can't accept that a non-white empire was stronger than Europe for centuries. They want to erase the reality of Islam's role in shaping world history. Mainly, they need to downplay how non-European civilizations dominated Europe at times. The Ottoman Empire was one of history's most powerful and long-lasting empires without being white. Cope.
Guess who is back? Guess who is back? We have Brother Nicodemus with us here. Brother Nicodemus from Nick and the Diasporans.
Sure.
He's got a YouTube channel which is talking about black people. Same way I do here. White lies that affect black people. Yeah.
So for a long time, there's a narration, there's a story that we've been told, which is not the case, which is not the reality that was.
Yes.
I mean, it's a different history from what we used to know. And chill with us, we're going to discuss that.
So apparently a white man has come forward. Interestingly, this white man is saying his fellow white people lied about history. You watched these videos like movies such as 300?
Yeah, sure.
Have you watched 300?
For 300, no. But I've watched movies that are trying to reshape history. To rewrite history. A different history from what we've lived in the past.
Actually, you know, I really love the movie The Passion of the Christ. But do you know in that movie Jesus is a white man?
Was he a white man?
No.
Wasn't a white man. And this is what we are going to discuss in this video.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you Evans for inviting me.
No problem. Yes.
Cool video.
No problem, brother. White people have lied for so many times. They have lied about important historical figures. Jesus Christ being the topmost. We have the gladiators. We have the 300 soldiers. We have the samurais. The samurais were never white. They were Japanese. We have Cleopatra. Cleopatra was not white. She was black. Or if she was not black, she was not white. She was somewhere in between. The Greeks were not white people.
Yeah,
the original Greeks.
Yep.
they were people of color.
Yeah.
But the white people have whitewashed all of these to make them appear as the most prominent historical figures. So I want us to watch this guy's video. We shall get back where we shall also share our thoughts and have a deep critical analysis.
The Spartans were not white, and history proves it. White people love to claim Spartans as their ancient warrior ancestors, but the only thing they would have done in battle is get sunburned. Spartans lived in the Mediterranean, not Scandinavia. They had trade, religious, and military ties to Africa and the Middle East. They were described as dark-skinned by their own contemporaries. They did not look like the cast of 300 because that was a movie, not a documentary. Even other Greeks thought they were weird, which is saying something. At some point, we have to ask, if Spartans were truly white, why does history keep making that idea look ridiculous? Sparta was in the Mediterranean, not the Arctic Circle. Sparta was located in the southern part of Greece, known for olives, sunshine, and not producing blonde-haired Vikings. They were part of the Mediterranean world, meaning they had trade and cultural exchanges with Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Persians. Genetic studies show that ancient Greeks, including Spartans, were a mix of Aegean, Middle Eastern, and Northern African ancestry. Meanwhile, Northern Europeans at the time were mostly just trying to figure out fire. In 480 BCE, the height of Spartan military dominance, Northern Europeans were living in tribal societies without written language. The Greeks referred to them as barbarians, which is ancient Greek for, we don't take these people seriously. Sparta had more in common with Egypt than with Viking reenactment festivals. White people weren't inheriting Spartan culture. They were just hoping no one checks a map. Greek civilization, including Sparta, was shaped by trade with Egypt, Anatolia, and Levant. They borrowed military and religious traditions from non-white civilizations. Their gods, myths, and architecture all show clear foreign influence. Their art depicts a range of skin tones, none of which match the cast of Gladiator. Meanwhile, Northern Europeans had no connection to Sparta. Spartans never fought alongside Germanic tribes or Celtic warriors. They didn't sail to Scandinavia to teach them about democracy. No Spartan ever carved "We are white" into a marble column. White people weren't shaping Spartan history. They were just inserting themselves into it centuries later. Greek sculptures and pottery depict Spartans with dark or olive skin. Greek writers described them as tough, rugged, and militaristic, not pale, blonde, and delicate. They wore hairstyles and clothing similar to their North African and Middle Eastern neighbors. At no point did anyone in ancient Greece say, "Wow, these guys remind me of Norwegians." Meanwhile, Northern Europeans looked like this at the time. No written language, no organized state, no marble statues, just wooden carvings, and possibly some rocks. White people weren't Spartan descendants. They were still figuring out soap when Sparta fell. The movie 300 falsely portrayed Spartans as a gym bro fantasy instead of actual warriors. They didn't fight in leather underwear. They wore armor. See, I didn't laugh. They weren't all jacked like fitness influencers. They were malnourished by modern standards. They were real people, not an Abercrombie ad with swords. They lived in a rigid, militarized state where children were raised more by the government than by their families. They weren't fighting for freedom. They ran a brutal slave society where helots did all of the work. They weren't individualists. They practiced state-mandated collectivism that would make even the most hardcore communist rethink their stance. White people weren't honoring Spartan culture. They were rewriting it to try to make themselves look cool. White nationalists cling to Sparta because they have no ancient civilizations of their own. They needed a European warrior society to idolize, and Rome was a bit too multicultural for their taste. They ignore the parts of Sparta that don't fit their ideology, like their reliance on enslaved labor. They cherry-pick Spartan militarism while ignoring their actual political structure. They turn a historically multi-ethnic society into a white nationalist fairy tale. Meanwhile, the real Spartans had no interest in racial purity. They fought alongside non-Greeks when it suited them. They weren't writing "Save Western Civilization" in their battle speeches. They collapsed because their rigid social structures made them completely inflexible. White nationalists weren't inspired by Sparta. They were desperate for a past that doesn't include medieval mud huts. If the Spartans were truly white, why does all historical evidence say the exact opposite? The gladiators were not white. They were black, Middle Eastern, and enslaved Europeans. White supremacists love to imagine gladiators as pure, noble, white warriors fighting for glory in the Colosseum. Hollywood has backed up this myth with movies like Gladiator, always starring some rugged, blue-eyed European man fighting for freedom. The reality? Gladiators were a multi-ethnic mix of enslaved Africans, Middle Easterners, Celts, Germans, and others, most of whom were forced to fight for the entertainment of the Roman elite. The first gladiators were not white. They were enslaved prisoners of war and foreigners. Gladiator fights originated from the Etruscan funeral rituals. They weren't even originally Roman. The first gladiators were enslaved people from conquered nations, including North Africans, Gauls, Thracians, and Middle Easterners. Rome's entire economy was built on enslaving and exploiting foreign people, meaning the average gladiator was not some noble Roman citizen, but an outsider. Black gladiators were common and highly valued. North African and Ethiopian gladiators were famous across the Roman Empire. Ancient Roman art even depicts them. Rome had extensive trade and slavery networks with Africa, meaning that African gladiators were regularly imported. The word Aethiops, meaning Ethiopians, appears in gladiator inscriptions, proving the black gladiators fought in the arena. The Moors, black North Africans, were also common in gladiatorial combat. If Rome was so white, why did they keep depicting black warriors in their artwork? Middle Eastern gladiators were among the most skilled fighters. Rome recruited soldiers and enslaved fighters from the Middle East, including Parthians and Syrians. Gladiators from Levant, modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, were known for their agility and their skills with curved swords. The Roman army was full of Arabs and Persians, so it makes sense that the gladiatorial schools included Middle Eastern fighters. Most gladiators were not freemen. They were slaves forced to fight. Despite Hollywood's bullshit noble warrior fantasy, the truth is most gladiators were enslaved men who had no choice. They were prisoners of war, criminals, and debt slaves who were bought and trained under brutal conditions. Gladiator schools operated like slave labor camps where men were beaten, starved, and forced to fight to survive. White supremacists love to fantasize about gladiators, but forget that they were the lowest class in Rome. The most famous gladiator, Spartacus, was an enslaved Thracian, not a white hero. Women were also gladiators, and they weren't white either. Emperor Domitian once hosted a fight between Ethiopian woman warriors. Gladiators were not noble Roman warriors. They were enslaved foreigners, mostly Africans, Middle Easterners, and Celts. The arena was filled with black and brown people, not just white guys. Hollywood erased the truth because white supremacists can't handle that Rome wasn't a white empire. If gladiators were so white, why does history prove otherwise? Cope. White people are the laziest exploiters in history, and the receipts are endless. White people love to posture as the architects of civilization, the hardest working people to ever grace the earth. But the historical record says otherwise. They have never built anything without forcing other people to do the labor. From the plantations of the Americas to the factories of the Industrial Revolution, from colonial conquests to modern corporate exploitation, the white ruling classes have perfected the art of avoiding real work while reaping the rewards of stolen labor. They enslaved millions rather than farming their own land. They looted entire continents rather than develop their own resources. They forced children into dangerous factories while sitting in boardrooms. They built entire economic systems around wage theft and inherited wealth. And today they still live off the spoils of past and present exploitation while calling everyone else lazy. The backbone of white economic dominance wasn't ingenuity or effort. It was forced labor on a global scale. The transatlantic slave trade was born because white landowners refused to till their own soil. European empires enslaved millions rather than build self-sufficient societies. Plantation owners in the US and Caribbean sat in mansions while enslaved Africans worked from dawn to dusk. After abolition, they created sharecropping, tenant farming, and debt peonage to keep non-white people working for free. Translation: white people never built their own economies. They just stole bodies to do it for them. If they were really the world's hardest workers, why did they need millions of enslaved people to do all the labor? It wasn't just labor they avoided. They refused to even create the conditions for labor. They stole land from indigenous peoples rather than develop their own agricultural systems. They plundered Africa, India, and Southeast Asia for raw materials instead of just producing their own. They extracted wealth from colonies while leaving the native people in poverty. They still live off stolen land and resources to this day, while pretending like their wealth comes from hard work. White civilization isn't built on innovation or industriousness. It's built on wholesale theft, followed by smug self-congratulation. When forced labor became less convenient, white elites turned to a whole new class of unpaid workers, their own children. Factories in 19th century England forced children as young as 5 into 16-hour shifts. Coal mines sent white children through tunnels while their fathers drank in pubs. U.S. textile mills worked children to the bone because paying adults was too expensive. White elites lounged in drawing rooms while their own children hacked up soot in mills. If they were such hard workers, why did they need to enslave children to keep their industries running? Slavery and child labor wasn't enough. White business owners then created an entire economic system to keep avoiding work. They paid starvation wages while raking in profits. They passed anti-union laws so workers could not demand fair pay. They relied on immigrant labor, such as Chinese, Mexican, and Caribbean, instead of working hard themselves. They offshored modern labor to the global south, while sitting in air-conditioned offices. And the scam continues. They call themselves job creators while hoarding wealth. They whine about immigrants taking jobs they refuse to do. They pretend finance is hard work, while laborers break their back to survive. White economies aren't built on sweat and toil. They're built on avoiding actual work while leeching off of the working class. After centuries of exploitation, white elites don't even bother to pretend working anymore. They inherited land and businesses built on slave labor. They used nepotism to secure wealth while demanding others pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They take credit for building businesses that their grandfathers stole. They retire early while calling minimum wage workers lazy. They work from home while demanding service workers commute for $12 an hour. They vacation in stolen wealth while mocking the poor for wanting basic housing. They flip houses instead of contributing to their communities. They act like trading stocks is a job while calling actual labor unskilled. If white people built their own wealth, why does so much of it come from inheritance, exploitation, and stolen land? The truth is in the history books, but white people would rather avoid it. Europeans never discovered anything. They looted, colonized, and took credit. The myth of European discovery is one of the most arrogant, historically illiterate lies ever told. Europeans didn't discover land, resources, or trade routes. They showed up late, stole shit, and renamed it. Then they rewrote themselves into the history books as pioneers. If someone breaks into your house, kills half your family, renames your living room, and tells everyone that they discovered it, that's what European exploration actually was. Columbus did not discover America. I hope you know that. Millions of people already lived here. He never even set foot in what is currently the United States. He landed in the Caribbean, got lost, then spent his time terrorizing, enslaving, and murdering the Taino people. The indigenous peoples of the Americas were thriving for 10,000 years before Columbus was even born. The Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas had cities, infrastructure, agriculture, as well as advanced knowledge of astronomy and engineering. The Norse, or the Vikings, reached North America 500 years before Columbus. But even they weren't discovering anything because indigenous people were already there. If Columbus had discovered the Americas, that would mean that you could walk into a McDonald's, discover it, and then own it. It isn't discovery, it's theft. Nor did Europeans discover Australia. Aboriginal Australians had been living there for 65,000 years. The oldest continuous civilization on Earth is Aboriginal Australia, with art, culture, and land management techniques dating back tens of thousands of years. When the British discovered Australia in 1770, they declared it terra nullius, meaning nobody's land, despite over 250 indigenous nations already living there. The British then slaughtered, oppressed, and displaced Aboriginal peoples for centuries, turning their homeland into a penal colony for British criminals. Europeans didn't discover trade routes to Asia. The Silk Road and Indian Ocean trade existed for thousands of years before Europeans even knew what a compass was. The Silk Road connected China, India, the Middle East, and Africa for 1,500 years before the Europeans even got involved. The Indian Ocean trading network, dominated by Arabs, Persians, Indians, and East Africans, had already been running for centuries before Spain and Portugal tried to muscle their way in. The Chinese Admiral Zheng He led massive expeditions across the Indian Ocean in the early 1400s, decades before the Portuguese even figured out how to round Africa. Europeans didn't discover Africa, which, if you believe that, what am I doing? Africa had thriving empires and global trade before Europeans even left their villages. Europeans like to pretend that Africa was a dark continent before they arrived, but that's complete bullshit. The Mali Empire between the 13th and 16th century was one of the wealthiest civilizations on Earth, with a vast trade network spanning across the Sahara. The Swahili coast had advanced maritime trade connecting India, Africa, and the Middle East centuries before the Europeans even showed up. Timbuktu was a major intellectual center, home to one of the world's oldest universities. When the Portuguese first arrived in West Africa, they didn't discover it. They had to ask permission from the African kings to set up trade ports. They didn't discover anything. They didn't civilize anything. They didn't modernize anything. They looted, colonized, and rewrote history. Cope. They can't cook, they can't drive, they can't dress, they can't even breathe. Is there anything else that white people cannot do? Sit. White people love to act like they set the standard for civilization, when their history proves they never even learned how to sit properly. For most of human history, people sat in ways that aligned with the body's natural structure. Ancient civilizations in Africa, Asia, and the Americas used deep squatting, floor sitting, and simple stools, postures that keep the spine healthy. I myself am in a full squat right now, as I am in every video. White Europeans, however, rejected these practical methods in favor of rigid, uncomfortable chairs. Indigenous cultures in the Americas sat and squatted in ways that preserved core strength and flexibility. African societies used simple stools or squatting postures that supported joint health. Asian cultures developed sitting positions such as Seiza and lotus position that encouraged good posture. Middle Eastern cultures used cushions and floor seating for comfort and mobility. Meanwhile, Europeans forced themselves into stiff-backed chairs that damaged their spinal cords forever. White people weren't improving on human traditions. They were ruining them. White people didn't just abandon healthy sitting postures, they also designed furniture that actively ruined their bodies. Medieval European chairs were stiff, high-backed, and uncomfortable, designed more for status than for function. During the Renaissance, they made chairs more decorative, but still ignored ergonomics. By the Victorian era, they forced themselves into rigid, upright chairs that restricted movement. Even modern office chairs are designed poorly, leading to widespread back pain and poor posture. And what was the result? Chronic back and joint pain became normal in Western societies. Europeans had to invent corsets, back braces, and posture correctors just to compensate for bad furniture. They created the modern office chair and had to rediscover lumbar support because their design was so flawed. They now spend billions on physical therapy to fix the issues their own sitting habits have caused. White people literally designed their own suffering, then had to sell solutions to the problems they created. White people have never known how to sit on the floor without looking broken. When white people sit on the ground, they fold their legs at bizarre angles like they've never used them before. They avoid squatting because their flexibility is gone from centuries of bad sitting habits. They struggle to get up from the floor like their joints are rusted shut. They make sitting on the ground look like a near-death experience instead of a normal human function. Sorry, I keep trying to redo that part and I can't, it's killing me. Meanwhile, other cultures have been sitting comfortably for centuries. Squatting is a natural rest position in many African, Asian, and indigenous cultures. Japanese and Middle Eastern cultures developed comfortable floor-based sitting traditions. People outside the West don't need expensive furniture to sit properly. White people weren't just bad at sitting. They made their bodies completely incapable of it. They ridiculed deep squatting as primitive while forcing themselves to sit in unnatural positions. They dismissed Asian and Middle Eastern floor seating as uncivilized, while destroying their own backs. They called indigenous sitting practices savage, only to rebrand them later as mindful living. They turned yoga and meditation sitting postures into luxury wellness trends centuries after ignoring them. Here's the pattern of white discovery. Step 1. Mock non-white practices as inferior. Step 2. Realize those practices were actually better. Step 3. Rename them, market them, and make a profit. White people weren't interested in better ways to sit. They were only interested in better ways to sell it. Now, they have entire industries dedicated to fixing posture problems that they caused. They pay thousands for ergonomic chairs instead of just sitting naturally. They need special mobility training just to regain the ability to squat. They spend millions on chiropractors, physical therapists, and yoga studios to undo centuries of bad habits. Meanwhile, the rest of the world just sits normally, without needing any of that. White people weren't ahead of the curve. They were so far behind, they had to sell themselves a way back. White people didn't innovate sitting. They sabotaged it. They ignored how the rest of the world sits, and now they suffer for it. If they just learned how to sit from non-white cultures, they wouldn't be spending millions trying to fix something that was never broken. Cope.
Wow, wow, wow. That was such a powerful revelation to hear, you know? What a lie I have always known. What a lie and what a revelation. Something is happening around this world. I don't know if you have noticed.
Yeah, the whites, some of the white counterparts are coming to the realization of the true reality.
Yeah,
that the history which we are living today is but fantasy, and the reality is something different from what we see today.
Yes. And we are living in the end times. And I'm telling you, things are coming out of control. Things you never thought would be are. Things which you thought are not. You know? Revelations are coming in and out. Days are shorter than they used to be. Things are happening all over the country, all over the world. You know? So we've always known that the white people are the greatest race in the whole world. We've always known that those civilizations, actually Hollywood really depicts them as white conquerors. Hollywood depicts them as people of might, you know? I guess even Hollywood will depict Nephilims as white people.
Every part, every character in the history that portrays a strong demeanor Hollywood would depict that as white. Because as our friend, our fellow brother here has expressed, that white people, they tend to associate themselves with those things or characters that make them seem to be great, superior than every other person in the world.
And you know, the problem with this is that it creates what we call white supremacy. Mm-hmm. It creates an imbalance in the society where now we lack equality. Mm-hmm. You know, equality calls for equal rights. Mm-hmm. Equality calls for justice. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. But when you place yourself as the conqueror of nations,
the pioneer of pioneers,
the pioneer of pioneers, the discoverer of discoveries, the Columbus of everything, then you set yourself apart. You set yourself as greater. You set yourself as exemplary, as exceptional. But that's not the case. The same discoveries you make are discoveries that someone else who is not white made, you know. I believe that the people who are writing history were writing history in favor of the white people.
Sure.
And because they were white, they had to write history in favor of their own.
So we are living in a history. I mean, we are being taught history that isn't our true reality.
It's like we are, I don't know if you've watched the movie Matrix.
I've watched Matrix, and I love that movie.
It's like we are living in the Matrix, and the game developer is a white scholar. You know?
Yeah.
He's making us experience the world as the way he has decided the code.
Yeah, the way he has decided it, that's how you're experiencing. I mean, can you imagine someone saying, or this white man saying that he discovered Africa?
Oh.
I mean, like Victoria, for instance.
Yeah.
We see there are people there already there, living there.
Families, Africans over there, children.
Fishing there, making boats.
Yes.
And some white guy
came
and he says he has discovered Lake Victoria.
Lake Victoria, the first person to discover Mount Kenya. No, it's a lie. You don't say discover. You say the first person to see. That one would make a meet.
The first white man to see. Yeah.
That one would make some sense because you walk ahead and you see something. You say, oh, I am the first man to see this. The same way if I go to England and I see a whale, I can say I'm the first black person to see a whale.
Very true.
Do you think my name will go down in the history books of the Europeans as the first black man who... It won't.
I think you won't.
I can't.
Yeah.
These people are just so much egoistic. Their ego is so much
centric people. And when they talk about Hollywood, this comes to a point of the role of social media in reshaping history and rewriting history.
It reminds me of something that a black American once told me. Oh, in the news we are told Africa is poor.
Yeah.
We are told lions are walking in the houses. Now he's looking around, he ain't see no lion. He's looking around, he ain't see no elephant. He's asking me, what time will they come out? I'm telling them, no, brother, I'll take you where you can see them, but they don't live here.
They're in a special place where you can visit and see them. I think they were portraying Africa like there's no electricity, people are starving, there's no water. I mean, the role of social media in reshaping history and portraying the white man as supreme more than any other race, more than any other people all over the world.
And it is problematic because someone else is taking advantage of someone else and someone else is hurting, you know. And this someone else is other races, not only black, because the Spartacus were a very fierce group of combats, you know. People feared them. If you heard Spartans were coming to your village, you'd start running yesterday.
With that just a story or the news of them coming, you'd be running.
You'd be running. And because now the white person heard of their might, no, now we must make them white. No, white is not might. White is not might, brother. White is not might.
I think there is a reason. Yeah, I know there should be no reason for every reason, but there's a reason why they are placing themselves in these great historical figures. Like our brother has expressed that Jesus, the way they're expressing him as a white man
with blue eyes,
it wasn't really what they're trying to portray.
Yes.
I think, what is the reason of all this? Why should a white person place himself on top of other races?
To have dominion, brother. To have dominion. There is no any other reason I can give greater than that. These people want to have dominion over black people, over Chinese, over everyone. Remember, the white people colonized every race.
Yeah, sure.
So they want to keep that to themselves.
The absolute power to themselves.
To themselves. But you know, we had our own maritime technology. In Mombasa, we were trading with the Indians. We were trading with the Chinese. We were trading with the Arabs before even the Portuguese came, you know. The Portuguese came later on. The Portuguese are, of course, Europeans, white people. Later on, when we still had trade with the outside of the world, you know. We had slaves leaving Africa going all the way to Muscat, where they were castrated. So East Africa was having contact with the rest of the world before the white man. We had Mansa Musa, who would leave Africa, go all the way to Mecca with a pile of gold, you know. We had these pyramids in Egypt. Egypt is predominantly, back then it was predominantly black people. If you look at the south of Egypt, black people called the Nubians. Nubians are very black people. Actually, very, very dark. The darkest complexion of Africans you can find in Sudan.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
The Nubians, which simply means the people of the black race, or black people.
Yes.
So, and we had our technology back then.
Yes.
Our technology was thriving. You see, up to now, the pyramids of Giza are still fascinating to the Western people.
Yes.
How did Africans
come about and build this?
Yeah, sure.
You know, there are many theories that Africans did not build it. Mara, it was aliens. Mara, it was the Nephilims. Okay, whichever thing you may say, but where are they found? Why would the Nephilims and the aliens not take it somewhere in Copenhagen?
Yeah.
Somewhere in
Greenland or somewhere.
And build it there? Why would they choose Africa?
I mean, they're living in that denial and not coming to that acceptance of that it's really Africans who did this.
Yes.
And they are undermining the potential of African people and the black people or any other race all over the world, in the sense that they're portraying themselves as supreme. Yeah.
Now, guys, you've gotten the point, and I hope that you'll do further research about how great you are as a black person. And remember, let's continue this discussion on the comment section. And please check our boy here,
Nick and Diasporans, and see what we got to offer you.
Yeah, he has a nice YouTube channel. He discusses black diaspora issues and geopolitics, you know.
Yeah.
You may want to check out his work. We will leave the description to his work, or rather his YouTube channel, in our description. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to subscribe here as well. Give me a super thanks as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Evans. For
are we asking for too much?
You're not asking for too much.
Okay.